All right, everybody, we get started. I'm super excited y'all are here. I'm going to put on the closed captions because I think that's such an amazing, that's a new thing that Hopin's doing. So I'm really excited. And we'll wait one more second for Crystal to come back and we'll get started. There you are. Oh my gosh. Some of my most favorite people right here in the same place. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Power of Rebellion conversation that we're going to have today. I was totally going to try and do this without my readers, but I can't see everybody clearly. So here we go. Yay, middle age. I am Dr. Melissa Bird, and I am an Episcopal lay preacher, author, healer, and witch. I am a descendant of the Shivwit clan of the Southern Paiutes of the Utah and Arizona desert, and I live in Corvallis, Oregon. My very presence on this earth is in and of itself an act of rebellion, and I am so pleased to be joined by some of my favorite rebellious people that I have connected with, not just through the Passionistas, but through my work in the world. And so I'm so happy to have everybody here. And in just a moment, I'm going to have Crystal and Miriam and Kara introduce themselves. But I wanted to talk a little bit about acts of rebellion and how we explore the power of rebellion. I really want to encourage everyone who's here and listening to think about the ultimate rebellion of love and how we can disrupt the status quo and engage in connection and bridging the gaps between all of us when we disrupt outside of traditional norms of fighting and protest and arguing and yelling, traditional as in the power structure defining that way, and thinking about how we can focus on the collective. One of the things I loved about the previous panel was that they started talking about decolonization being the pathway to inclusion. And I feel like engaging in acts of rebellion is another way to really disrupt the industry of diversity, equity, and inclusion to get us to a place where we can have authentic conversations and shift the structure of power and deliberation. So I'm so excited to have all of you with us here today. And I am going to start. Hi, Alyssa. I'm excited too. I'm going to start by asking Kara to introduce yourself and talk to us about your maybe a small little story of rebellion for you and what it means.
Hi, I'm Kara Reedy. I'm the director of the Disabled Journalists Association. I am a journalist, and I fell into journalism kind of just completely by accident. My whole life has sort of been rebellion. I'm a dwarf, and most dwarfs are really considered to be, and I don't think most people realize this, we're considered to be kind of subhuman. So no one's really looking for us or looking for us to do anything. So even in grade school, to get to do double Dutch sometimes was a complication, not because I couldn't do it, but because people had decided I couldn't do it. So we would sit and have arguments about whether I could do it or not. And then I would do it, and they're like, oh, you can actually do that. Yes. It's really just you who thought I couldn't. But when I went to college, I was in the theater department, and they again were just like, oh, you can't be an actor because no one will hire you. So we're not going to really invest time or money into teaching you, even though I was paying them. So in essence, they were kind of stealing money from me. So I've had periods of time where I've fought and where I've kind of given up. And theater was one of the things that I gave up. But when I got to journalism by accident, I realized I was really good at it. And it wasn't something anyone could take away, although they tried. And I was at CNN for 10 years, and they spent the entire 10 years telling me I couldn't be a journalist and don't call myself that because I'm not one. And that is one of my biggest acts of rebellion, because I think I was just at that point tired. I was like, okay, you said I couldn't do theater. Now you're saying I can't do journalism, which there's literally no height requirement for that. All you need is your brain and to ask questions. And so I fought it, and I fought them. And then I realized I needed to leave there in order to really fight the fight. And once I left, life, that was the biggest act of rebellion, was because they were like, well, I guess you're going to get another assistant job. Good for you. And now I'm got a grant from Ford to start the Disabled Journalists Association. I go into newsrooms that I've been in and worked in, and I'm training them how to do it. So good. And they have to come to me. Like, it's not optional anymore. It's like, oh, nope, she's the one that you go to for training on this, and you have to. It's very interesting to watch some people that I knew early on come back and be like, oh, could you help us? Sure, no problem.
So good. Thank you so much. Miriam?
I don't want to follow that. So my name is Miriam Ahmed. I am based in Napa, California, and I am in the wine and food industry. What I do with my consulting company is help people further their diversity and sustainability initiatives through educational programs, through the launch of publications, through the recruitment of candidates and voices. And that is an act of rebellion also, in that I think the most important thing is teaching people that they can manage what they do day to day and do this work simultaneously. I mean, I know everyone's like, yeah, this is Eureka. But it's just, in the wine industry, you know, we're rooted in colonialism, we are rooted in power structures that are very old and have historically omitted so many people. And so the work that I do every day is pushing on that for improvement, for inclusivity. And I think, like, honestly, I was really honored, Dr. Melissa Bird, when you asked me to be on this panel, because I had to consider what it meant to me to be a rebel. And, you know, I think part of rebellion is resisting convention. And if I think about it that way, I have been pretty much doing that my whole life. So I have really always had a hard time swimming with the stream, because I'm always asking why, or like, could we do it another way? Sometimes to like the detriment of my own efficiency, and sometimes absolutely to like the credit and success of my intuition. And so I think I kind of look at everything with a little bit of a rebellious lens, which has positioned my company to what it is today, 2 years after starting. But, you know, my old jobs, and even as a teenager, I think back of how I was. And I know this is the sort of this rebellion core lives in me of like, why do we do it that way? Can't we do it better? And so that's a little bit about me. I mean, Kara, I think the work you're doing is so inspiring. I mean, oh my gosh, I'll please just go on mute now.
Thanks, Miriam. Crystal, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello. I am on the East Coast, so I keep saying good evening, but I recognize that it may not be evening for everyone. So hello at some point during your day today. I'm so glad to be here. And of course, thank you, Melissa, for inviting me and having this opportunity. My name is Crystal Lanice Walker, and I have kind of two roles. My main role is serving as a senior director for a nonprofit organization, MLT, Management Leadership for Tomorrow. And I run the Racial Equity at Work initiative, which are we have two programs, Black Equity at Work, as well as Hispanic Equity at Work, that just launched last week. But we developed the first ever programs that help hold partners, companies, employers across this country accountable for racial equity, by setting real targets, by not having a hosh-posh, everybody says they're doing a great job, but providing them with support to actually kind of hold themselves accountable to the commitments that we've seen in the past. But my passion work, which is perfect, I actually run my own passion consulting firm. And it's me doing work that I love with clients based on my passions, and what I'm interested in and how I can be of help. And there I focus on racial equity in the workplace as well. But I look at it through a lens of making sure that Black women are at the center of those conversations and that their voices are heard, but more importantly, that their needs are met. And even that work is an act of rebellion, because there's this idea that we need to focus on others and that will somehow trickle down to everyone else. But what we know historically, what we know in our hearts for those of us who experience this as Black women, we know that when Black women are the focus, everybody else around us benefits, oftentimes at our own detriment or at the slower pace of our own benefit. And that is why that's important for me to center that. To talk about an act of rebellion, it really reminds me of a story I've shared before. I grew up in North Carolina in the rural South. I loved where I grew up. I had a great family, lots of aunts, uncles, mom, dad, siblings. And my mother was a teacher assistant, and she taught at this elementary school, the elementary school I attended. And of course, I started kindergarten a little bit ahead because I had a mother who made me read over the summer and do flashcards, right? Everyone else was playing in the mud. I had to do that before I could go play in the mud. And so when I started kindergarten, I was reading more than most kindergarteners coming in. And what would often happen was that I would become bored. Whatever sheet, whatever activity, I was done in a few moments. And oftentimes I would try to go help my classmates. But what would happen instead was that I was told that I was being distracting or that I wasn't the teacher and I needed to sit down. And so I spent a lot of kindergarten in the corner or out in the hallway. So much to the point where there were times that my mom would walk by because she's teaches there. And I would say, Mom, I'm out in the hallway again. And she would just walk by me like she didn't see me at that point. But where that all came to a head was that, and this was back when there were different ways that we tried to praise kids and tried to give them encouragement. But they used to keep track of our reading level and like how many books we had read and what we were doing. And we all had a tiger, and the tiger was in the hallway. So of course, now that I think about that, that's mortifying for every kid to have a tiger. And that tiger was moving to a finish line of growth. And so like everyone knew where your growth. But for me, I saw it as a marker because my little tiger was in the front. And so I knew that across the entire kindergarten that I had been reading the most books, right, and doing those activities. And when we got to the end of the school year, my mother was getting dressed to go to an award ceremony for the kids. And I said, well, I should be getting the reading award. We've been talking about whoever's in the front wins. And my mom said, well, you're not getting that award. Someone else from the kindergarten class is getting it. And I was so upset because it did not make sense to me how I could be told for a whole school year that whoever's in the front gets this big award. And I'm like, well, my cub is in the front. That should be me. My mother tried to convince me not to go. I went anyway. And we kind of stood in the back, and I watched the person who was called. She was in my class. She was not a student of color. She was a young white girl. And the teacher ultimately decided that because I spent time in the corner or out in the hallway, that diminished what I had done academically, when the criteria the entire time was only about what you did academically. And I remember my mother having to tell me something. And it was at that moment I realized that I had to do something different. And she said that you're Black, you're a girl, and we don't have money and wealth. And so you're going to have to work 3 times harder than everyone else. You're going to have to put in 3 times as much work. She said, but I unfortunately have to tell you, you're also going to have to expect half the recognition when you do put in the work. And I remember being angry about that. And so at that point for me, I knew that wasn't something that I was going to be willing to accept. And that if I put in 3 times the work, I was going to get all the recognition that came with it. And that I was going to do that by any means necessary, even if that meant telling my teacher, no, this is exactly what it needed to be. And so that was really my first introduction to being rebellious. And it has most certainly followed me all of my days, as my grandmother would tell me.
Thank you so much, all of you, for sharing your stories. I think that the power of this really lends itself so much to thinking about courage, because what all three of you described. And I also love that each of you comes from such a different field. I mean, we've got the wine industry, we've got journalism, we've got DEI work, right? Like we've got all these different backgrounds. And I just think all of us require a great deal of courage sometimes to keep going and doing the work that we're doing. So each of you are disrupting your respective fields and pushing past barriers. What gives you the courage to engage in your work? And any of you can start answering that question, but what gives you the courage to engage in your work, in the disruption?
I will be honest, I don't think I've ever considered it as courage until you just asked this question. It's never seemed like courage, but an act of survival. And if I want to survive and be healthy, and not just survive, if I want to thrive, there are going to be things that I'm going to just have to do that just haven't been done, that may not have an example. And so I've never looked at that as courage. I looked at that as survival. But I can also see how actions that you take to survive can be courageous. I'm going to have to sit with that one a little bit. Thank you very much, Dr. Bird, for now bringing something for me to sit with. But truly, I've never considered it courage. I've considered it survival.
Awesome.
I'm going to agree. Like, I think about my time at CNN in particular. I was living in New York City, and like, it's expensive to live there. And I knew that I had to move up the ladder in order to continue living there. And so I had to do more than everyone else. And I was really fueled by anger. I'm not even going to lie about that. Like, I was angry at them consistently telling me like all the metrics that they use to define what's a good story I was meeting or exceeding, but I couldn't get past this job while Billy in the corner was writing like one story every month that no one read and was making 6 figures. And you would ask why, because I'm bold, and like I asked why, and he was like, well, he has a family. I'm like, because you're funding him to have a family. I can't have a family because I can't afford it, but you're funding him, which is what you're saying is the white boy needs to produce more children, which means he needs to make money, but the poor little black girl shouldn't be making that money because we don't need more of her.
Ooh.
We don't. And I'm not sure. I don't really think that they were like working it through their heads that much, because oppression and that kind of stuff it's not thought through especially when it's woven into our culture in such a way. It's just the way it is. So they don't really think about the cause and effect of what they're doing and how they're continuing to foster inequality just by like not promoting someone because you're not comfortable with it.
That is so powerful. Like, that just gave me the total chill. Like, yeah. That, and it ties in so well with all the other things that we've been hearing throughout the summit. Like, this idea that the way we fund things and invest in things that perpetuates that hierarchy of white supremacy.
I agree with Crystal. I haven't really thought about like the day-to-day being like based in courage. That sentiment of like, yeah, to survive, maybe I have to be courageous, but the primary is survival. I just don't think of it that way. For me, like, the courage to engage in my work is like deeply rooted in my own integrity and like what I want to use my life and to be of service for. And then the wine industry is, like many industries, but I think really, really exponentially wine industry had this real wake-up call in 2020 that was well overdue, especially when it comes to the systems and the systems of oppression that exist in wine. And so there's a small but mighty and growing community of color and community of advocates in the wine industry. And so, like, internally, the courage, I think, is more so, I would use my integrity or my purpose over courage, though it would take courage to live in my integrity and purpose. And then I would say, like, externally, the community, like, that keeps me courageous and keeps me pushing forward, you know?
The thing I really love about where that question went is that you touch on this idea of not just surviving, but thriving. And I think for a lot of people, particularly women and women of color, there's an expectation that we stay in survival mode and we sacrifice ourselves to stay in survival mode and to push into thriving, to even say that we are able to thrive or that we deserve to thrive or that, hell yeah, I'm going to thrive is such an act of rebellion and pushing against the power structure that it terrifies people when we talk about thriving, all of us thriving. What do you think? You know, I sent you this question about what you wish people understood. And I said the word religion on purpose, religion, oppression, and rebellion, because religion is so tightly tied to maintaining power structures of white supremacy and heteronormativity, right? Like, and we work under those structures. What do you wish people, and I love this thriving context to this, but what do you wish people really understood about the intersections of religion, oppression, and rebellion? Because we never talk about religion in any of these conferences, any of these empowerment summits, like any of the stuff we do, but religion is the thread that justifies the crap. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
I can jump in. I think just to touch on thriving, like, this idea of people being scared of all of us thriving is because people think there's, like, limited pieces to this pie, but that's not true. And so when we're talking about, like, religion and what it can be rooted in, especially, like, patriarchal values and more than that, like, we're just talking the same thing as, like, white supremacy. We're talking about, like, holding up the dominant culture, right? So in religion, like, oftentimes we're talking about holding up the men. So I say that to say that I grew up with a very, very Methodist mom and a Muslim father, and they never agreed. And so I got, like, the brunt of both of those things in a lot of ways. And I remember the first time I went to a mosque, I think I was 4, and I could not understand. I had to leave the mosque because I could not understand why I couldn't go with my dad, because I wasn't allowed on the first floor. And I just, like, you know, American first-gen kid, like, what do you mean? I'm supposed to go? I'm supposed to go with my parents. And it was like, I remember being that young, but being radicalized by it because I felt so opposite from the existing rules and structure. And I do think you're right, Melissa. Like, we don't talk about it enough, even if from the perspective of the impact it has had on us. But then, like, one of the other things was the nature of oppression. Like, I worked for a really large institution in food and beverage that is really deeply rooted in hierarchy because of the way that the brigade system is set up, which is how we run kitchens. So it's, you know, head chef, executive chef, chef with cuisine, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Down it goes, and, like, the treatment continues to get worse and worse and worse the further down you are. And I just say that because the way that kitchen culture was applied to how the leadership was at this organization that I worked at. And one of the things that I realized after stepping out of that system was how many, not only outward, like, elements of oppression there was, but this internal oppression. Like, sometimes we don't talk about even in our workplaces, walking by artifacts. Like, there was a Hall of Fame that was literally all white men. Like, there was no one celebrated in diversity in wine or food. And there was nothing wrong with that. It was just an act of our participation in oppression. And so, I mean, I think religion impacts us at least, right? And then with this idea of like a continued reminder of not having your piece of the pie they think is limited. It's just this kind of continuous cycle that's happened for me, I guess.
I'll go because I had a very strange relationship with religion. I'm Catholic, kind of. But but my parents were hippies, and so they found a Catholic church that had mass in the basement of the church, and so my dad played bongos in the band. There were lesbians with full families in relationships. Like, that's what I grew up in. We had fresh baked hippie bread at communion. Like, there were single moms. Like, there was Black, white, Native. Like, everybody was there. So that's from the time I was born. I got baptized in my living room in the punch bowl. Like, that's how not formal they were. And from that time until I hit my brother went to Catholic school after 5th grade. We went to this church that was we switched to the church that was attached to the school. And it was like a boom, like a weight had just been dropped on my head. It was very white, very conservative. You sat in your pews. The ushers used to come over and shove all of the Black people all into one pew because obviously we were all related. When they transferred me over to the school, I was bullied in a way that I didn't know could be possible. And it's this weird thing where I have this relationship with my church from when I was a kid, where it was this very free, happy place, to this horrible, hellish, fire and brimstone, ultra conservative, ultra racist place. And that's where I really learned how religion subjugates people on purpose. And if you want to go to the church, you can go, but you got to sit in the back, but you're still praising Jesus or whatever. I don't know. And I always thought that was just, excuse my French, but bullshit. Like, even at 7, I was like, this is some bullshit, because if you go down the road, we could be in the basement eating hippie bread and being chill and still praising the same Jesus. I don't know what this garbage is. And I've never, even though I continued to go to Catholic school all the way through college, I've never forgiven the church for that time. And I always look at it with a side eye, because if I was subjugated like that, and I run into friends who have been put into those situations, and they all feel the same way. Like, we're putting this on you, you are lower. But then you start looking at like all these Catholic institutions with all these money, and it turns out St. Louis U, Georgetown, all of them stole land from indigenous people and then sold Black people to buy more land or whatever assets, because they were going bankrupt because they didn't manage their money properly. And I'm supposed to give a crap about that? So
I think for me, with religion, religion and our personal values are tightly woven. And oftentimes it is easier for us to use religion as the vehicle to justify the values that, quite honestly, we've either accepted or learned to accept or have continued to perpetuate. And I don't think that it really comes down to any practice of religion. It comes down to the essence of who we are individually and what resources we utilize at our disposal to have the impact or to get the result that we want. And unfortunately, religion has been used to do that for both positive reasons, but unfortunately, it has been used far more often for negative reasons. And it causes a huge concern because it makes it really easy for us to attach a religion to a value. When I think about inclusion, equity, and about rebelling, it's living in the values that you want to walk through this earth to receive, but also to give. And whatever religion that comes through that channel, it's how you decided to use it. And I think it's more of an act of rebellion in whatever religion you choose to practice, that you chose to practice it through love and for the purpose of nourishing yourself and to find the best path to walk through this life, not for the purpose of using it to determine that someone is or is not worthy. And so for me, the rebellion and the shift and the thinking about how that all comes together, it's love, but it's also the act of doing it for yourself. That's what's most rebellious about it.
I love that so much because, you know, I am always preaching like this connection through love, because I really think that's the ultimate rebellion, that if we just love on each other. And I just really love this idea of rebellion is to nourish yourself and engage in love. Like, wow, like that. It's so huge across so many levels, and it encompasses so much of, I think, a lot of the frustration just that all of us experience in doing this work. And there's so many things about, I mean, I get this all the time as both a Christian lay preacher for the Episcopal Church and a pagan witch. Like, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't on both sides of those fences, right? Because of all the harm that Christianity has done to witches and all, you know, and me really believing and having a fundamental faith that I did not grow up with. Like, I did not grow up in a Christian church. So I came to the church as a 44-year-old grown-ass woman going, I don't understand this whole thing about Jesus and love and what? Like, what even is this? But Kara, it really reminded, like, it so resonated with me how deeply connected that whole group of humanity was to spirit when you're eating hippie bread and, you know, listening to the drums, because that is spirit. That is the creator. That is love, right? Like, the fundamental purpose is love. I love that so much. Thank you so much for answering that question, because I hope everyone who's here and listens to this doesn't shy away from the religion question, because I think it is so critically important for us to start talking about disrupting this narrative around religion and how rebellious it is for us to openly talk about it in spaces that aren't religious spaces, like not spiritual conferences or whatever it is, right? And that's also what I really loved about the decolonization panel before this. If you didn't hear it, I hope you get to, because one of the things that Dahlia was talking about is all the facets of wellness. And one of them is spiritual wellness, and decolonizing the structure of the wellness community and the spirituality community, I think, is so important. So this is a DEI conference. Go figure. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's in the title. So I'm really curious what you all think is broken about the DEI framework, and what is one thing that you would change about it? Also, thank you for all your laughter. I really also appreciate all that.
Since you made it clear I was a DEI practitioner, I feel like I should go first. Where I think we missed the mark are in two main places. One, this concept that having a focus to actually enforce equitable practices is something that requires anything other than actual empathy and compassion. This framework that I have to be convinced that someone deserves to have a space, and that convincing requires that I attach it to profits and loss, or that I attach it to a risk assessment, or that I attach it to some other normal business function or practice. The reality is we are not talking about a business function or practice. We are talking about a person. We are talking about a community. We are talking about a culture. We are talking about basic human life. And when we're looking at DEI in the workplace to me is the most untapped space for civil rights work. Not in the sense that we are fighting to have a space and that there are now legal ramifications and laws that are on the books that says you can't discriminate. That fight was done on the outside of the workplace, right? The workplace had to respond to that. But the workplace has had this ability to do the bare minimum of just following the law. And now we're at a framework to say that's not good enough. And oftentimes in DEI, what I hear over and over again is two things. That's not what we've done before, or we're doing that. It's just taking time. And what I always respond to is that if you took this much time in any other business function of your organization would cease to exist. And yet what you need to have existing in your organization are people. And you have chosen to populate the workplace and overpopulate communities. For what reason at all? Right? It makes me often think about, I think, Melissa, you and I talked about this a long time ago. There was a tweet, and I hate that I can't remember the person who tweeted it. And if I can find it, I'll retweet it. But the person tweeted something to the effect of, you are sitting in your current seat in a home, in a town, in a city, in a state, in a country, on this globe that's somehow being suspended in midair for millions of years. And this is how you decided to wake up every day and treat people, right? If I think about that, that is what's wrong with the DEI framework. It's because we all forget how finite and fragile we are in that seat. And what I think is happening is that we're seeing a disruption of, it's not just about a seat anymore. The seat was your point for power. That chair doesn't mean anything for me. So when you ask me or say people deserve a seat at the table, why would I want to sit in a seat of someone who occupied it in that manner? I don't want to occupy that seat if that seat has that energy in it, right? So like my girl, Miss Chisholm, I'm going to bring my own chair. So you can move yours out of the way. I'm going to bring my own because I'm bringing something different to this table that this table hasn't seen. In fact, I don't even want to be at the table. Let's just start something different. And oftentimes with DEI framework, it's just chiseling away at what exists rather than saying, let's just start over, right? Let's build something that we haven't seen before. So that's how I look at that. And I think the rebellion connects because when you tell someone, I don't want a seat at your table, I will bring my own seat and chair. You meet me here. You're saying, I'm not sitting in this chair to fulfill what you wanted. I am bringing in a chair to fulfill what's needed. And that may not be what you and I are going to share the same table about.
I just love it when you take me to church, Miss Crystal. I just love it so damn much. It makes me so damn happy. So good. Miriam, Kara, anyone?
I'll go. So, the thing about the table and not wanting to sit at it, that was sort of my trajectory in newsrooms. I realized very quickly I didn't want to be in the newsroom anymore. Not that I didn't want to do journalism. I didn't want to be in that space because the space is violent and I didn't want to subject myself to it. And I don't do strict DEI work. What I do is I go to newsrooms and I teach them how to cover disability. When I get there, I am usually met with, we're here for our sensitivity training. And I'm like, I don't know what that is. And I don't do that. So you are in the wrong room. But you should stay because I'm going to teach some other things. And what I teach is how to cover stories, how to cover the disability community. And a lot of what I'm teaching is, here's where you missed. Here's where you missed. I'm constantly saying, you missed all of this. The way you report these stories is backwards and broken. Disability, everyone is disabled or is going to be disabled at some point in your life. Unless you die very, very young, you're going to have a disability. You're going to age into it. So you're telling these stories like disabled people are separate people without the intersections of who they are. And I start throwing out facts like Black and Indigenous populations have the highest amount of disability. Have you explored why? Well, no. Right. No. So what stories are you telling when you're doing this? And that's, in my work, that's how it's not whatever that normal way that they're reporting stories. I don't talk to them about that. And I don't sit at their table because I don't like the table and I think the table's violent. I'm not ever going to do that. And I think that DEI in these corporations is so often like checkboxing, like just like they walk in and say, I'm coming here for my sensitivity training. Well, somebody misinformed you because you're not here. That's not what we're doing. But like, they're already prepared to ignore you. That's what the sensitivity word is saying. I'm here. I get it. I'm not supposed to say the R word anymore. Okay, got it. I have an important story to do. So hurry up with your time because I don't have time for this. And they're just, and I think it has to do with the educational system and everything. No one is really prepared to look at the connections to white supremacy that all of our industries participate in, or else white supremacy wouldn't be here still if we were really working on it.
So great. I really love what you said about sensitivity training and how it ties into what Crystal said about empathy and compassion, right? Like doing this work really requires seeing humanity and seeing human beings. And the minute we call it sensitivity, anything, it was over before it even began. So good. Miriam?
Well, I was going to say that, and like people checking their privilege, like even understand. I mean, again, I work in a dominantly white space, right, in the wine industry still, and like getting people to the point of understanding their privilege, working them through their discomfort, is like in a lot of people's minds. They work, okay, we got that done. Like, now let's have a champagne party because people at least understand that. When in reality, it's like, no, like that's not the cooking you get for this minimal amount of work that you've done. But I think I completely agree with the sentiments, that Crystal and Kara have shared, and I think I deal with checklist mentality all the time in my consulting. So I don't necessarily need to lament on that, but I think one thing that persists in at least my work is this assumption versus understanding. So like trying to create a committee internally with absolutely no one with any training to basically center comfort and assume you know how to fix the problem. That's still broken. That's not a DEI framework that the four of us are working with, but it is a DEI framework that exists in corporate and large-scale businesses, right? We will just figure it out ourselves, or we will center our comfort and take a long time getting it done, to Crystal's point, because we don't want to, make anyone feel uncomfortable. We don't want to be insensitive in a way, right? And then like this other idea of thinking that you know how to serve the communities that you're trying to bring in. So, that comes in the form of performative action. It comes also in the form of like creating systems and pathways that don't actually serve the communities. I've seen the best best breakthroughs in this in wine anyway, where people are actually sitting down and having conversations with the communities that they're trying to serve. And that is new, you know? So I think there is still some brokenness in just assuming we have answers or like we can become experts, when in reality, like, this actually takes a level of expertise, and we should just bring in the help that we need to get it done, and the accountability we need to get it done too.
Yeah, it's really good. I think it's particularly fascinating in the wine and agricultural industries where the wealth is built still to this day on the backs of human beings that do not have one iota of a voice at that champagne party. And I think that it's a fascinating space in the wine and agricultural industries to think about how they are still engaging in slave labor in a way that we just completely choose to ignore altogether as a country. It's really profound.
I mean, that's like capitalism, right? I mean, like, if we can make more and more and more money, then like the consequence down the line matters less and less. Which is why we need to work to decentralize the conversation, right? Well, in this world, have to make, this era, have to make a living, have to sustain ourselves, our families, and our land, but we don't have to be in such excess that we are robbing people of their basic human rights.
Yeah, so important. Thank you so much, all of you, for that really powerful conversation. The last question I have for you, and then I think we've got some Q&A. We do have some Q&A questions for folks. So the last question I have for you is, in the context of rebellion, like here we are moving into 2023, right? We're in the middle of a gigantic pandemic still. It is not over. The dogs have decided to play, just so you know. So if you hear Potato having a moment, that's why. In the context of rebellion and in the context of moving into 2023, what is your favorite thing about 2022 in the idea of rebelliousness and where we're going next? So what's your favorite thing about 2022 in the context of rebellion?
Does someone want to go first, or I could go? Okay. Well, mine is quick. Mine is the rise of representation in media and in what we see. And I definitely think we can and will and should do better. But in 2020, especially just speaking from really hyper niche wine industry, like there was still such a lack of representation. And worse, when there started to be representation, merit was questioned. And that's also bullshit. Yeah. And so I think, at least again in my small world, I'm seeing that there is really so much less question of whether or not the merit is there for someone who is represented and celebrated. And it is so painful to say that that is one of my favorite forms of rebellion, because let me say, like, it's also really hard and sad and shitty, right? But as long as that narrative is pushing forward, then it does mean there's internal work being done and introspection being done from a representation and media standpoint, at least again in our small food and wine world. But there has been this shift in attitude and understanding and privilege understanding, albeit small, albeit not my favorite example, but something that I think is very powerful and a sign of what's to come too. Crystal's gonna have a word on that, I already know. It's painful to say that, really, but.
I would say my favorite part is more watching others find a way to rebel. I am seeing so many different forms of rebellion, right? Like, to me, rebellion is on a spectrum. Like, to your point, there's rebellion that's very public, protesting or going into the voting box and voting a different way that someone thought you were. That's rebellion that's in your own space. Watching people take joy in rebelling against those things that have been harmful to them has been the most favorite thing I've seen. Whether it's from Naomi Osaka saying, no, I'm not playing tennis, right? I love me. And I want to make sure my mental health is good. That's not just a rebellion to say that, but you stopped a group of spectators from being able to have entertainment and enjoyment at your own expense, right? Like the fact that like people are finding ways to say, not at my expense, right? And whether that's on a small scale or corporations or large organizations or consultants who are helping make that larger, I'm just excited to see folks really taking a stand against things that are harmful, being willing to call it out, but also showing that there's a way to operate in that space without ever being harmful. And in a lot of ways, that's calling it out. Like, you don't have to be a horrible person at this seat at the table, right? And the only real reason that you're afraid of giving it to anyone else is because you think that we're going to occupy the space in which you occupied it, and for the same reasons and to harm. And so the fact that people are rebelling to say, I don't even need that space, I'm going to do me, whether it's a work-life balance, I'm cutting you off at 6, whatever it is, I love seeing it. I love when I just, on social media, like people I don't even know, right? And they're like, I rebelled today because I turned my Zoom off. And I'm like, yes, girl, turn that Zoom off. I don't know you, but that makes me excited because that builds momentum on a larger scale. And then if you start rebelling to protect yourself, you're going to keep doing that. But when you're doing it with love in mind, that's my favorite part of 2022 so far.
So I've had an interesting 2022, kind of a rough one, but this summer I decided to go back to my old summer job that I had when I was a kid, just for fun. And I ran a concession stand at a theater park here in St. Louis. And I think the best part of 2022 is watching Gen Z take in this information and being able to see how at that age was very different from them at that age. They're much gentler. They care more. They're worried about people's feelings. They're willing to, I think they get a bad rap because they're like, oh, they don't want to work. I'm like, they want to work. They don't want to be exploited though. And they have the emotional intelligence to tell you they don't want to be exploited. But as long as you are fair dealers with them, they're some of the hardest workers I've ever worked with. And that to me was exciting, to see the next generation just being like, ew, no, I'm not going to murder myself for this job that's in the summer. I do want to have fun. I do want to work hard, but not, and I want everybody's pronouns to be used. And it was nice to see what's seeping down and from, their parents having to go through certain things and then them processing it and being like, nah, we're not going to do that. And that to me is exciting because that means that it is going to change.
That's really good. I really like that a lot. Really, really good. So we have 2 questions and we just have a little bit of time, but we have a couple of questions. The first one is, I'm going to ask the most recent one and then I'll ask the earlier one. Do you have any thoughts on how we can use our inner rebellious spirit to make change in the upcoming elections? Crystal just laughs. Kara just laughs. Miriam just laughs. Anyone?
I mean, the easy thing is use your rebellious spirit to make change in the upcoming elections. I feel like the answer is a little bit in the question. But I think it's very important that we fight this powerlessness that is being pushed on us when it comes to changing our political landscape. So what can we do? And so much of what is happening effectively is grassroots. So what kind of campaigns can you support? Can you canvass? I mean, this is the stuff that people need help with. They don't they need the word getting out there more than anything. So I mean, can you bring that, you know, into your service to shake shit up?
Melissa, you know, I love talking about finding your lane, right? And then you ride the hell out of it. And I think when you're thinking about this election or anything, but specifically with the question of being the election, where do you possess the most power? And also don't look at it from the perspective of someone else has told you that you lack power there. Where do you know in your gut that you have the most power and the most ability to impact in the way that you see that this needs to go? And you find where you sit in that. And to Miriam's point, whether or not it's canvassing, whether it's writing letters, whether or not you've got a big bankroll and you can give the money, whether or not it's going to be the person who, you know what, I can't rally everybody. I just got to rally the 4 people on my block today, right? Like whatever that is, like you drive the hell out of that car in that lane, right? And you drive it all the way to election day, but you keep driving it, right? That's the big thing that I would say, is that we can't have ebbs and flows of our commitment to change our government or to change laws. It can't just be when it's go time, right? You know, like they say, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. So I don't have to rev myself back up in October to get ready to do something in November if I've been doing some things all year long, right? And so you might drive folks to the polls, but how are you scheduling them for the next time? Are you taking them to the council meeting so that they can hear the other things that are happening about the folks that you took them to vote for? Just find that lane and ride it.
I think the really important thing that you just pointed out is elections happen every year, people. Sometimes they happen twice a year. They don't just happen on the even numbered years for the federal. No, like elections are all the time. So I actually am going to say, be rebellious and don't focus on federal elections. Focus on school board and judges and mayors and city council people, because those are the people that are making the decisions that directly impact your life. And
as well as the neighborhood watch president.
Neighborhood watch, yes.
And everybody else, right? Because it's not just on a city, state level. Who's running the PTA in school, right? Like in your neighborhood school, who's running the PTA? Because this isn't just about trying to do something from the top down at the bigger scale, right? If they're trying to take books out of a kid's school, then you need to be at that school, right? Like, because that's going on a local level, right? It's, you know, and so absolutely.
Yeah. Kara, do you have anything to add?
So yes to everything. And I also feel like there's a lot of people that would love to vote, but it's not accessible to them. If you can't figure out what to do, call your voting board and it's like, are all of your voting machines accessible? If not all of them, do you have an accessible situation for everyone? Which some people actually can't vote in person. So when they start getting rid of ballots and they start doing all of these other things, they're disenfranchising people. So don't be asleep at the wheel when they start saying that stuff. And you don't have to wait for federal. When they start messing around, they're going to do it for PTA, school board, whatever. So hit them. That's the best time to hit them anyway, because they're not as busy. So you hit them up and they're like, oh, how come everyone can't vote for this? Like, how come all these? And I think the biggest thing is to not be asleep at the wheel. We are so close to fascism right now. Like, and I'm not sure that people really understand how close we are. And we don't have to go there. Like, we can pull it back out, but you got to be awake to do it. You got to be open. You got to be talking. And you have to listen. If you're hearing something that someone's saying that you've never heard before, shut up.
Yes. Miriam, do you have something you want to add real quick?
I completely agree. I was just going to say that in hearing I think we get this overwhelming stress of hearing all the different ways you can help. Like Crystal saying, choose a lane, do what you can. and we have to have faith that other people are going to link up and do the other things, because it's supposed to feel hard because we are currently being oppressed. So like, because it's hard to do is because of the way the structure is set up right now. So if you do the one thing, it can sometimes feel like lonely, my God, there's still so much to do. But in actuality, like, you are fighting the system. That discomfort is natural because you are going against the stream. You're fighting the system of oppression. So because there's so much to do doesn't mean you shouldn't do anything at all, or look around and see people who aren't doing it. You have to decide what your participation in the system of oppression is.
Thank you. We're not going to get to the other question because I am a stickler for time. So thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, the three of you, for being here with us today. Miriam, I love that you said I need this panel every day. Me too.